It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. The historic reconciliation between the Palestinian, Hamas and Fatah parties on October 12th has now been marked by Hamas giving up control of the border passes to the Gaza Strip over to the Palestinian Authority. Egypt has responded by opening up the Rafah border crossing, allowing the besieged population of Gaza a lifeline to the outside world. One of the first passengers to cross the border on his way to Israel was Imad Al-Soos. He talked about his experience in the newly opened border.
راح الاجراء هذا ما فيش دخلنا من يعني سياره واحده من البيت لغايه هنا وهذا حاجه كويسه.
Dr. Imad Al-Soos is a scholar on the Hamas party and of the Palestinian nationalism. Welcome, Dr. Al-Soos.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Al-Soos, in the past, any attempt by the two largest Palestinian parties, Hamas and Fatah, to reconcile their differences was always interrupted and prevented with Israeli violence. This time around, it seems that negotiations were carefully planned in a way that forced the Israelis to accept the results. How did all of this happen, and was there any violence?
In fact, there was violence last Tuesday when Israel killed 7 Palestinians in Gaza. Hamas declared that it's a provocation against the reconciliation agreement in order to force the Palestinian faction to retaliate. This is to answer your questions. In fact, this time the agreement passed because there was no American and Israeli veto on the agreement. And this is what Musa Abu Marzouk, Hamas prominent leader, declared before the signing of the reconciliation agreement. Why there is no American or Israeli veto on this? I think we have to understand it from a broader geopolitical perspective, what the so-called the deal of the century that the American, the Egyptian, and the Israelis are planning, and it is and it includes the Saudis in this deal. So it's giving Egypt and President Sisi more regional role in the region and more promises with Israel to normalize with the Arab countries, basically the Gulf region. And everybody knows that the two-state solution is dead. So Israel is not losing any political concessions in this new deal.
Dr. Al-Soos, the new leadership of Hamas, whether it is Yahya Sinwar or Salih al-Aruri, they have in the past at least have had a reputation for being very hardliners, committed to armed struggle. Yet in this situation, they have signed a reconciliation agreement and agreed to make unprecedented compromises to the Palestinian Authority. Explain the reasons why.
First of all, we have to look at Hamas and institutions, and these are elected leaders. Every 4 years, Hamas has internal elections, and these are the new leaders of Hamas. So they are the representative of the institution, not representative of themselves, even though both of them are coming from the military wing. And this is why they are called hardliners. Another perspective that's very important about these two figures, they are liberated prisoners from Shalit, prisoners exchange from 2011. And I think they are new faces, and they were not part of the Palestinian political split, and they were not part of the regional polarization after the Arab revolutions. And Hamas could capitalize on their image, not only externally, also internally, to solve the social split that resulted from the political split by Hamas military takeover in 2007. And from a Palestinian standpoint, they paid a dear price for the struggle in the name of Palestine, for which they must be rewarded. And so Hamas saw of them as mobilizing figures. But all in all, they are an outcome of internal process of Hamas every 4 years.
Dr. Al-Soos, part of the reconciliation agreement, which was delayed and not yet officially agreed upon, is the issue of the armed wing of Hamas. Now, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, demands that it will be dissolved, but Hamas is reluctant by giving up control over the border passes. Doesn't Hamas effectively give up security control to the Palestinian Authority?
Yes and no. It depends on which kind or which form of security Hamas is willing to hand over. If it comes, for example, to social order, fighting drugs, fighting crimes, then Hamas is willing to hand over security for the PA. But when it comes to the armed resistance and its security apparatus and security wing in Gaza, Hamas is not willing to hand over security. And this is where exactly the conflicting points between the PA and Hamas. There is no compromise so far, and it's going to be escalated in the future because the security doctrine of each side is different vis-a-vis Israel. PA is in security coordination with Israel. It has to tell Israel of any kind of attacks against Israel, while the armed resistance is basically built against the Israeli occupation. So we have to concentrate on what's called the security doctrine of each side. They are conflicting, and they will be so.
Right. Now, the senior Egyptian intelligence officers participated in the reconciliation talks, and now Egypt opens up a little bit of the border, on the Rafah border. Why has Egypt changed its policy towards the reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah, especially considering that Egyptian President Al-Sisi is fiercely opposed to the Muslim Brotherhood and associates Hamas with Muslim Brotherhood?
I think this is a very important question. First of all, Hamas issued a new charter in 2017 saying that we are a Palestinian national movement, and from a legal perspective and relation between states like Egypt and Palestine, Hamas is no longer part of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's very important for the Egyptian policy. From the other side, I think Hamas and Egypt, now they are closer than ever. It's because of the Sinai Peninsula, the security there. And they have a common enemy, ISIS. ISIS in Sinai and ISIS in Gaza are a common enemy for Egypt and Hamas. But ISIS in Sinai is still operating and attacking the army and the police, the Egyptian army and police, while in Gaza it's under control. But it's a threat for both of them. From the other side, and it's very important that why Egypt is approaching Hamas, that Hamas has a good relation with the tribes in Sinai. And we know that Sinai is a tribal system, like the Gulf states. And many of the young people in these tribes, because of the Israeli military action that prioritize security over dialogue or development in Sinai, these aggrieved young people went for a militant organization, a strong militant organization. And Hamas has good relation with the tribes that it can help to cut human capital for these terrorist groups. And this is, I think, where is the critical point Hamas can play in Sinai.
Now, the Israeli siege on the Gaza Strip may become irrelevant if the Rafah crossing remains open. Do you think that the Israeli government will lift the siege?
I think the siege is more relevant than ever now because Hamas left office under the ramification of the constraints and the siege on Hamas. And now Israel, it might ease the siege, but it will remain a mechanism to pressure Palestinians to normalize with the occupation the way the BA is doing in the West Bank.
All right, Dr. Al-Soos, I thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to having you back on The Real News.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us here on The Real News Network.